Folding tables stretched along the curb of Edgecombe Avenue in Harlem on a Saturday in 1976. A transistor radio sat on a third-floor windowsill. Stevie Wonder, loud. A half-barrel grill smoked at the curb, cut clean by a torch in somebody's basement. Aluminum trays came down the stoops, balanced on hips. Your grandmother carried one. Number 19 on this list traveled from a house in Mississippi to a kitchen in Cabrini Green and ended at an elder's table in 1978. Number 14 was poured from a 2-gallon jug by a woman who decided who got the first cup. Number 7 on this list cost the host nothing because the numbers runner paid for the soda. These 25 dishes were not catering. They were a neighborhood feeding itself in the open street. Hit subscribe before this list ends. Here are the 25 African-American block party dishes that disappeared after the 1970s. Number 25, half-smoked sausages on the half-barrel grill. The barrel came from a corner garage in Northwest D.C. Somebody cut it lengthwise with a torch on a Tuesday. Iron legs by Friday. The half-smokes came from mangers in West Baltimore, packed in butcher paper, split lengthwise so they cooked faster. The man working the fire wore a dish towel on his shoulder, the way your uncle did. He turned each link with a long fork that used to be part of a fence. The smell carried 3 blocks. Kids lined up first because the elders said so. The bun was a slice of Wonder Bread, folded once. A half smoke off that grill in 1977 cost the host nothing and fed 40 people. By 1989, the man with the torch was gone. The garage was a check cashing storefront. The grill outlived the block. Number 24, red beans and rice in a foil tray. The pot started Friday night on a back burner in a 4th floor walk-up in Brownsville. Red beans soaked in a coffee can. A ham hock sat on top, jaw still attached. Your grandmother went to bed and woke up to a pot that smelled like a sundae she had not had since Lake Charles. Saturday morning, the rice went in a separate pan because rice and beans needed their own dignity. Both came down the stairs in a foil hotel pan set on a folding table. A spoon stayed in the tray all afternoon. The serving woman did not need to ask twice. She knew who was coming back for seconds. She knew who would say no and mean yes. The recipe came up from Louisiana on a Greyhound in 1962 and ended on Sutter Avenue by 1986 when the building got sold and the elders moved out. 2 generations, 1 pot. Number 23, yellow rice with peas. On the border blocks where Bed-Stuy met East New York, the Puerto Rican families lived 3 doors down from the black families. Somebody always brought arroz con gandules. The rice was the color of a school bus, like a crayon nobody had used yet. Achiote oil in a jar on the shelf. Pigeon peas from a can with the label your mother could not read. A piece of pork shoulder cubed and seared in the bottom of the pot before the rice went in. The whole thing came down in a Reynolds tray. The auntie who carried it had a towel folded under one corner because the bottom was hot. Black kids ate it next to the curry goat. Puerto Rican kids ate it next to the collards. Nobody asked whose food was whose. By the late 1980s, the families were spread across 3 boroughs and the trays did not meet on the same block again. Number 22, smothered chicken backs in a foil hotel pan. Chicken backs were the part the butcher could not sell on Friday. They went home in a brown bag for 30 cents a pound. Saturday morning, they got dredged in flour, browned in lard, smothered in onion gravy. Your grandmother layered them into a foil tray with the gravy poured over. The tray sat on the radio in the living room while she got dressed. Down on the curb, the tray went on a folding table next to the rice. A serving spoon stood up in the gravy. like a steak in soft ground. A child carrying a paper plate held it with two hands because the gravy was still hot. The backs were almost all bone. The reward was the gravy on the rice. The thing is, the backs were never the point. The gravy was the point. By 1985, the butcher who sold the backs had closed. Number 21, your auntie's potato salad with mustard yellow. The recipe lived in one woman's head and changed by mood. Mustard, mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, hard-boiled egg, paprika on top, never raisins, never apple. The bowl was a Tupperware big enough to bathe a small dog in. She covered it with the same lid she had owned since 1969. She carried it down herself, set it on the table herself, lifted the lid herself, because if you opened her bowl and stuck a wrong spoon in, she would know. You would hear about it next Sunday. Children knew not to ask whose salad it was. The shape of the bowl told them. By 1990, the auntie had moved out to Yonkers. The niece took the recipe wrong, and the bowl sat empty on a high shelf in a kitchen no grandchild visited on Saturdays. Number 20, macaroni and cheese baked in church pan-sized casseroles. The pan was the same one that had carried bake sale lasagna to the basement of Mount Olive Baptist for 10 years. Deep, dented in two corners. It could feed 30 children. The macaroni cooked in a stock pot before sundown. The cheese was a brick of cheddar grated by hand while the radio played WBLS. Layer macaroni, layer cheese, layer macaroni, layer cheese. Evaporated milk poured over, paprika on top, into the oven for 45 minutes. The crust was the prize. The corner pieces were promised to the woman who carried the pan like a tribute. Nobody disputed it. The thing is, the recipe was never written down. It was passed down by watching. By 1988, the deep pan had cracked, the church basement was rented out for funerals only, and the recipe got reduced to a shoebox pan version that fed 8, not 30. Number 19, sauce on saltines, the deepest dish on this list. What most people miss about sauce is that it was never a snack. It was a passport. Sauce is hog head, meat, simmered for hours with vinegar, hot peppers, and bay leaves, then poured into a loaf pan and chilled until it set into a trembling brick of pork and jelly. It came up from Mississippi in the suitcases of women who left Greenwood and Yazoo City on the Illinois Central in the 1940s and 1950s. They arrived in the Black Belt of Chicago. By 1976, it was a block party plate in Lawndale and on the South Side, served by elders to other elders on a corner table where the children were not invited. Your great-grandmother brought it down on a saltine sleeve and a paring knife. The slice was thin, the cracker held it, the way a biscuit holds gravy. A pinch of hot sauce went on top from a bottle that had ridden up from Greenville in a handbag in 1953. Sauce was a memory dish. It tasted like a back porch in a town these elders had left at 15. They named the cousins who had taught them the recipe. They named the towns, town after town, generation after generation. The naming was the point. The eating was the proof. By 1985, most of the elders were gone, and Glorious Malone's in Milwaukee was one of the only commercial sauce makers left in the upper Midwest. The brick in the loaf pan was the closing argument of the Great Migration generation. It set, it sliced, and it disappeared. Number 18, curry goat in foil trays. On Caribbean black blocks in Crown Heights and Flatbush, the foil tray that drew the longest line was the curry goat. Goat shoulder cubed, seasoned with Jamaican curry powder, Scotch bonnet, thyme, and a tin of allspice from a shop on Nostrand. It cooked 4 hours on a back burner in an apartment that smelled like a country your auntie had left in 1971. The tray came down with a ladle stuck in it. White rice underneath, gravy on top, a piece of hard dough bread on the side to push the gravy onto the spoon, the way you would push a memory onto a page. Black American kids tasted it and went home asking their mothers why their own food did not have that smell. The trays sat next to the collards. Both got finished. By 1995, the cook was a citizen. Her children spoke without an accent, and the goat had moved into a takeout box on Church Avenue for $9. Number 17, pound cake from Aunt Jemima or Sarah Lee. Not every cake on the block was made from scratch. Some came in a yellow box from the bottom shelf of the corner store, like a small confession. A working mother got home at 6 on Friday, slid the foil pan into the oven, came out to the table with the smell of vanilla in the kitchen, and called it her own. The act of pulling it from the oven was the act of caring. Sarah Lee pound cake on a paper plate with a spoon of canned peaches on top from a Del Monte tin was a curb dessert in 1974 that nobody apologized for. The frozen food aisle was a friend to a mother working 2 shifts. The thing is, the cake was never about the cake. It was about who slid it in the oven for you. By 1990, the freezer aisle had grown bigger. The homemade pound cake had moved into a once-a-year holiday slot, and the Saturday curb cake was a sheet from the Pathmark Bakery, plastic domed with no story attached. Number 16, watermelon halved on cutting boards on the curb. A whole melon came up from a stand in Hunts Point on a Friday evening for $2, sat in a metal wash tub of ice on a stoop, and got cut open at 3 o'clock when the sun was on the east side of the building. The cutter was always the same man, 2 doors down, with a long knife he kept wrapped in a dish towel. He halved it, quartered it, sliced it into wedges that went on a paper plate. Children ate it, leaning forward over the curb so the juice did not stain their Sunday clothes. The seeds got spit into the gutter without comment. The melon was like a clock. When the rinds piled up in the gutter, you knew the afternoon was past its peak. By 1992, the cutting man had passed, the long knife was in his daughter's drawer, and the curb watermelon was a supermarket pre-cut tray with a price sticker. Number 15, Faygo Rock and Rye, RC Cola, Tropical Fantasy, and Welch's Grape. The soda was free for the kids and the elders both. The soda was a regional code. In Detroit, it was Faygo Rock and Rye in the red can, vanilla and cherry, the bottle your cousins fought over. In Brooklyn, it was Tropical Fantasy in the wax-coated bottle, 25 cents at the bodega, 20 cans for $5 at the cash and carry. In Newark and the Bronx, it was Welch's Grape Soda, purple lips on every child by 4 o'clock. RC Cola filled in everywhere else. The host paid for none of it because the numbers runner walked the block on Friday afternoon, took the host's hand, and said, "The sodas are on me." That is how a block party in 1976 got its sweetness paid for. Now, the numbers runner is a memory. The sodas are still on the shelf. The economy that put them in a kid's hand for free is gone. Number 14, sweet tea from a folding table jug, the deepest social ritual on this list. What most people miss about the tea is that it was never about the tea, it was about who poured. The jug was 2 gallons, glass with a plastic lid, set on a folding table at the corner of Lenox and 145th from 1 o'clock until the ice melted. The tea brewed all day on a windowsill in a sun jar, 4 Lipton bags floating in cold water under the August sun until the water turned the color of weak coffee. 2 cups of sugar went in warm. A whole lemon, sliced, floated on top like a small wheel. The jug came down by elevator at 1, set on the table by a woman in a church dress. She decided who got poured first. The order was not random. Elders first, oldest woman before oldest man. Children with empty cups waited their turn without complaint because your mother had told you on the way down the stairs. The pour was 4 ounces. The cup was paper. The woman holding the jug had grown up on a porch in Greenville, South Carolina, where her own grandmother had poured the same way in the same order. The pouring was the social architecture of the block. Generation after generation, the rules were passed down by watching, not by telling. A man could be drunk on Schlitz and respected on the curb only if he held his cup out and said, "Please." A child could be loud all afternoon and still get poured if she came over quietly with both hands. By the late 1980s, the woman in the church dress had passed. Her daughter worked Saturdays, the jug was washed and put in the basement, and the tea on the new block was poured from a plastic Arizona bottle on a kitchen counter. The order of the pour was the first thing to die when the elders left. Number 13, black-eyed peas with rice. Hoppin' John traveled from a low-country kitchen up the Atlantic seaboard and arrived on a folding table on a curb in Brooklyn in the 1970s. The dish was simple: ham hock smoked the night before, peas soaked in a bowl on the radiator, white rice cooked alongside, mixed in the foil tray at the last minute so the rice did not get cloudy, a pinch of black pepper on top. Your grandmother put a small spoon next to it because the elders ate small portions. For luck, they ate bigger portions of the macaroni. In the South, Hoppin' John was a new year's plate. On the block in July, it was a memory you could chew. By 1988, the dish had moved almost entirely back to a New Year's Day table inside the apartment. Most blocks lost it without noticing. Number 12, collards cooked Friday, served Saturday on the curb. The collards on the curb were never the freshly cooked collards. The freshly cooked collards were Sunday collards. The block party collards had to sit overnight because greens that had not been kissed by their own Potlikker for 12 hours were not collards yet. A neck bone went in Friday after work. A whole onion, a tablespoon of vinegar, a pinch of red pepper. The pot stayed on a low flame past midnight, like a slow conversation. Your grandmother took it off when she finally went to bed. Saturday morning, the greens went into the foil pan cold, and the pan got reheated on the curb in a chafing tray over a can of Sterno. The bitterness was gone. The Potlikker was a brown miracle. A piece of cornbread from a cast iron skillet got dipped into the liquor and eaten standing. By 1990, the chafing tray had been replaced by a microwave upstairs, and the collards no longer rested 12 hours because the elder who insisted on the rest had passed. Number 11, hot links sliced on white bread. Hot links came up from East Texas and Louisiana in the back of a station wagon and ended up on the half-barrel grill in Watts in South Central Los Angeles by 1973. The link was bright red, coarsely ground, hot enough to sweat through. The grill man sliced the link diagonally on a paper plate, slid 2 slices onto a piece of Wonder Bread, folded the bread once. The plate was nothing more than a napkin under a fold. There was no bun. The bread was the plate. The bread was the side. The bread soaked the grease. Bite after bite, the bread did 3 jobs at once. By 1985, the link supplier in Compton had closed, the grill man had moved to Inglewood, and the hot link on Wonder Bread was on a menu in a sit-down restaurant downtown for $9 instead of a folded slice on a curb for free. Number 10, fried catfish nuggets in newspaper-lined trays. The catfish came up from the Mississippi Delta on Thursday in a styrofoam cooler that had ridden a Greyhound from Memphis. Your uncle cut it into nuggets, dredged it in cornmeal seasoned with Lawry's, and dropped it into a cast iron pot of hot lard on the stove. The newspaper underneath the basket was the Amsterdam News from Wednesday. The grease soaked the print like ink on a borrowed page. You could read the sports page through it after lunch. A wedge of lemon and a bottle of Louisiana hot sauce sat on the table. By 1992, the catfish from Memphis had stopped coming. The Greyhound route had changed, the cooler was retired, and the Friday fish on the corner was farmed Vietnamese tilapia from Western beef. Number 9, hush puppies in big paper sacks. Hush puppies are cornmeal, onion, baking powder, buttermilk, dropped into hot lard from a tablespoon, fried until they were the color of a brown paper bag, tipped straight into a brown paper bag because no plate was ever big enough. The sack got passed hand to hand down the curb. Children reached in without permission. Elders reached in second because your grandmother would have been heartbroken to see a child told to wait. The grease seeped through and dotted the bottom of the bag. The bag itself was the snack, the wrapper, and the trash. By the late 1980s, the deep fryer in the apartment was unplugged because of new building rules, and the hush puppy on the curb was a frozen Cisco square heated in an oven with a memory in the name only. Number 8, coconut bread and hard dough bread from the Brooklyn Caribbean bakeries. On Saturday morning, the line outside the bakery on Nostrand and Empire stretched 20 deep. The hard dough loaves were still warm in the brown paper. They went home in shopping bags and onto the folding table on the curb by 2 o'clock. Your auntie sliced it with a serrated knife borrowed from the upstairs kitchen. Each slice was thick like a slab of warm cake. The bread was the side for the curry goat, the side for the saltfish fritter, the breakfast for the elder who had not eaten since 6. Coconut bread came in a smaller loaf, denser, sweeter, with shredded coconut visible in the crumb. By 1995, the bakery was still open, but the bread no longer came down to the curb because the curb itself was empty. Number 7, saltfish fritters. Saltfish in a tin came off a boat in Red Hook on a Tuesday, sat in a kitchen sink in cold water for 2 days to leach the salt, then got flaked into a batter of the flour, scotch bonnet, scallion, thyme, and dropped into hot oil from a tablespoon. The fritter came out the size of a $50, the color of dark amber. Your auntie lined them on a sheet pan covered in newspaper and brought the pan down at 3. Children grabbed 2 at a time. Elders held one between thumb and finger and ate it in 3 bites. The fritter was a bridge food, a Caribbean recipe at a Black American block party, accepted without comment by 1976. By 1990, the saltfish had gotten expensive. Your auntie was working a second job on Saturdays, and the fritters showed up only at funerals. Number 6, the pig feet jar at the elders' table. Pickled pig feet sat in a tall glass jar on a side table reserved for the elders. The brine was vinegar, salt, hot pepper flakes, garlic, a bay leaf. The feet had been pickled the previous Sunday. The jar passed elder to elder. A long fork came out, speared a foot. The foot landed on a paper plate. Your great uncle ate it with a paper napkin, and the next elder waited his turn. Children were not invited to that table. They watched from the curb. They did not understand what was happening. The pickled foot was not a snack. It was a marker of who had survived enough Saturdays to deserve a foot. The thing is, the jar was a kind of roll call. By 1990, the elders were gone, the jar was empty, and pickled pig feet had moved into a corner of the bodega next to the pickled eggs. Alone, untouched, waiting for a customer who had also disappeared. Number 5, sweet potato pie cut into squares for kids. The pie came out of the oven Friday night at 10, cooled on the kitchen counter under a clean dish towel until Saturday noon, and got cut into 32 small squares with a paring knife. The squares went on a paper plate. The plate sat on the children's end of the folding table. Each child took one. Each child knew not to take 2 until every other child had taken one. The crust was lard. The filling was sweet potatoes mashed with brown sugar, evaporated milk, nutmeg, and a teaspoon of bourbon if your grandmother felt generous. The squares were a child's first taste of a pie that her mother and grandmother had been making for generations. since Reconstruction. By 1992, the pie squares on the curb had been replaced by store-bought Hostess cupcakes, and the children no longer learned the rule about taking only one. Number 4, banana pudding with vanilla wafers in foil pans. Banana pudding on the block was a layered pan. Vanilla wafers on the bottom, sliced bananas, vanilla custard from a Jell-O cook and serve box, more wafers, more bananas, more custard, meringue on top from 3 egg whites whipped by hand for 10 minutes until your auntie's wrist hurt. The pan went in the broiler for 2 minutes to brown the meringue and came out the color of a paper bag. She covered it with foil and carried it down at 4. The serving spoon was a long iced tea spoon. Each kid got a small portion in a paper cup. The wafer at the bottom of the cup had turned to cake by then, soaked in custard like a small cobblestone of childhood. By 1990, the cook and serve box had been replaced by instant pudding, the meringue had been replaced by Cool Whip, and the dish on the curb had moved into a plastic Tupperware in a kitchen. Number 3, chitlin bites simmered for hours behind the grill. The chitlins had been cleaned in the apartment for 2 days, soaked, scrubbed, rinsed, simmered with onion, vinegar, and a hot pepper. They smelled. Your grandmother knew it. Her downstairs neighbor knew it. The neighbor did not complain because the neighbor would be on the curb on Saturday with a plate. The chitlin pot got carried down by her grown son because it was heavy. It sat behind the grill on a folding stool away from the children near the elders. The bites came on a paper plate with hot sauce. They were not for everybody. A man who had grown up on chitlins in Greenwood, Mississippi, ate them with reverence, the way a deacon eats communion. A teenager born in Harlem turned away. By the late 1980s, the cleaning of chitlins had become a cost in time that working women could no longer pay, and the pot stopped coming down. Number 2, hot dog with chili and slaw on Wonder Bread. There was no bun. The bun was a slice of Wonder Bread folded in half like a small white envelope. The dog was an Oscar Mayer or a soubrette, sliced lengthwise, set on the half barrel. The chili was a pot your auntie had simmered. Friday night, ground beef, kidney beans, chili powder, a tin of tomato paste, a pinch of sugar. The slaw was raw cabbage chopped fine, a tablespoon of mayonnaise, a tablespoon of yellow mustard, a pinch of celery seed. The dog landed on the bread, the chili on top, the slaw on top of the chili, the bread folded around it. A child ate it with 2 hands, the grease ran down the wrist. A second slice of Wonder Bread caught what fell. By 1995, the corner store had stopped carrying the slaw cabbage by the head, and the dog on the curb had become a foil-wrapped item from a halal cart. Number 1, smoked turkey wings with hot sauce squeeze bottles. Turkey wings were the headliner at the block parties of the late 1970s. 3 pounds apiece, smoked over hickory in the half barrel for 4 hours until the meat slid off the bone. Basted with butter, hot sauce, garlic, and a 1/4 cup of cane vinegar. The wings came off the grill on a sheet pan and went on the table on a stack of paper plates. A bottle of Crystal hot sauce stood next to them, lid off, ready. The plate cost the host nothing because your uncle had bought the wings from a wholesale butcher on Friday for 50 cents a pound. A man holding a wing on the curb at 6 o'clock in 1978 was holding the proof that a neighborhood with no commercial budget could feed itself in the open street. By 1995, the wholesale butcher had closed. The half barrel was rusted in the backyard, and the smoked turkey wing on a paper plate had become a special at a brunch restaurant for $16. Number 21, chitterlings simmered overnight with red pepper. This was the Christmas Eve dish in working-class black households from Detroit to New Orleans. The intestines came in a 5-gallon bucket from the butcher, and the grandmothers of the family spent a full afternoon cleaning them under cold running water in the backyard. The pot simmered all night with onion, garlic, vinegar, and crushed red pepper, and the smell sat in the curtains for a week. You ate them on Christmas Day with hot sauce and a slice of white bread. The flavor was hard, earthy, and absolutely a holiday food. Booker T. Washington wrote about this very tradition at Christmas more than a century ago. By the late 1970s, the cleaning ritual was vanishing. Younger cousins refused the chore. Grocery chains stopped stocking the hog tubs. Within one generation, the dish moved from a centerpiece to a memory. If beans simmered all day on one burner, the other belonged to whatever the garden gave. And in late summer, nothing came sweeter than fried corn cut straight off the cob. Your grandmother held each ear upright in a wide bowl, ran a sharp knife down the rows, then went back with the dull side of the blade and scraped hard. That scraping was everything. It pulled the milky starch inside each row, and that liquid turned fried corn creamy without a drop of cream. The kernels went into bacon grease, always bacon grease, never butter, because butter burned too fast, and cooked low, stirring constantly until the corn thickened and clung to the spoon. Salt, black pepper. Some cooks added sugar if the corn was starchy, but the old women said if you needed sugar, you picked it too late. It tasted like August, hot, golden, and gone before you were ready. But if those skillet meals told the story of weeknight survival, dirty rice told the story of where those families came from. It started in the bayou parishes of Louisiana, where Creole cooks used chicken livers and gizzards to give white rice its muddy color and deep mineral taste. By the time the recipe traveled north during the migration, many families had swapped organ meats for ground beef, cheaper, easier to find in urban stores, and far less likely to start arguments with children who refuse liver. You browned the beef in bacon grease with the holy trinity of onion, celery, and bell pepper, stirred in garlic, cayenne, and thyme, then folded in cooked white rice. The grains turned gray-brown as they absorbed the drippings, and the whole dish carried a warmth that started at the back of your throat. In New Orleans, old cooks side-eyed any version made without giblets, but in Chicago in '72, ground beef dirty rice was its own tradition. Number 23, home-canned ambrosia with hand-grated coconut. This was not the Cool Whip and Mandarin orange version that came later. The ambrosia of 1962 began in summer when a black household in Birmingham would put up oranges and pineapple from a roadside stand, sealing them in glass jars in the cellar. On Christmas Day, your mother opened a jar, drained the syrup into a saucepan to thicken, and grated a fresh coconut by hand on the side of a tin grater. The shavings curled into the bowl like white ribbons. A spoonful tasted like July sunshine in the middle of December. That was the whole point. By 1976, the canning equipment was pushed to the back of the pantry. Frozen fruit cocktail had taken its place. The coconut came pre-shredded in a bag, and nobody noticed how easy and how flat the bowl had become. The flavor of summer was gone. Monday meant pinto beans in every black kitchen that remembered the South, and the ritual started the night before, sorting dry beans on a table, picking out the stones, leaving them to soak in cold water overnight. By morning, they were swollen. Your mother set them on a low flame with a ham hock, quartered onion, garlic, and water to cover by 2 inches. The pot stayed there all day. Monday was wash day. In New Orleans, red beans and rice on Monday was law, and beans could simmer unwatched while laundry got done on the board or hauled to the laundromat. By evening, they had broken into a thick, creamy broth that clung to cornbread. A bowl cost almost nothing and fed everyone. The woman who seasoned them knew the salt went in late because adding it early toughened the skins. She carried that timing in her hands. When she stopped cooking, Mondays never tasted the same. She started those pinto beans the night before, always the night before. Dried pintos soaked in water on the counter while the house slept, and by morning, they were swollen and ready. A half pound of ground beef went in first, browned with onion and garlic, and then the drained beans on top with enough water to cover by 2 inches. Bay leaf, salt pork if she had it. That pot sat on a back burner all afternoon, lid cracked, filling the house with a smell that told every child on the block what was for dinner. Slow cooking legumes with small amounts of meat traces directly to West African one-pot stews, and in the rural South, pinto beans had been stretching meals since long before emancipation. By the early 1970s, a bag of dried pintos cost 15 cents, the beef about 60, and the whole pot fed 8 with cornbread on the side. You knew they were done when the broth turned creamy on its own without adding a thing. Number 22, sweet potato pone baked in a cast iron skillet. Pone is what came before the pie. The grandmother of a Greenville, Mississippi household would grate raw sweet potatoes into a bowl with molasses, butter, an egg, a fistful of brown sugar, and grated nutmeg. The whole thing went into a hot iron skillet and baked until the edges turned dark and chewy, and the middle stayed soft like a soft pudding with a candy crust. You ate it warm with a glass of cold milk on Christmas afternoon, sitting on the porch in your church clothes. The day was quiet, the dish was loud. By 1979, the pone had been replaced by a smoother pie and a store-bought crust. Easier, prettier, not the same. The pone was rough, alive, and tasted like the dirt the potato came from. In the 1970s, pig ear sandwiches were sold at juke joints, neighborhood bars, and roadside stands across the Black South, and the people who ate them did not apologize. The ears were cleaned, boiled for hours until the cartilage softened, then sliced thin and either pickled in spiced vinegar or deep fried until the edges went crisp. Served on white bread with hot sauce, mustard, and dill pickles. The sandwich had a texture nothing else matched. Crunchy where the fat rendered, tender where the meat pulled apart, tangy from the vinegar. The dish came from the nose-to-tail tradition that had fed black families since slavery, when the ears, feet, and tails were the only cuts passed down to the quarters. At places like the original Cozy Corner in Memphis or Nameless Stands in the Mississippi Delta, a pig ear sandwich and a cold drink was Saturday night. Today, those stands are mostly gone. The ears are still cheap, but the hands that slow cooked them have moved on. The ground beef and rice skillet was a Monday through Friday revelation in black households across Detroit, Chicago, and every city that caught the tail end of the Great Migration. 1 pound of beef, 1 cup of rice, 1 bell pepper, 1 onion, a can of tomatoes, and dinner was done. You browned the meat first, always in the same skillet your mother had seasoned for years, and the grease stayed in because that was the flavor. Onion and pepper went in next, then the rice raw, right into the pan with the tomatoes and enough water to cover. Lid on, 20 minutes, no stirring. You learned the no stirring rule the hard way because lifting that lid let the steam out and left you with crunchy rice and a ruined evening. The rice soaked up everything, and what came out tasted like it took hours. The whole dish ran under $1.50 and left enough for tomorrow's lunch, packed in a Cool Whip container. Number 18, Divinity candy in 3 colors. Divinity is a meringue made with hot sugar syrup, beaten by hand until the candy turns soft and white and holds a peak. A woman in Birmingham would make 3 batches, tinting one pink with strawberry, one pale green with mint, and leaving one white and studded with toasted pecans. The pieces were dropped by the spoonful onto wax paper and left on the counter to set like little snowdrifts the size of a quarter. You were allowed 1 piece on Christmas Eve and 1 on Christmas morning. That was the whole rule. By the early 1980s, store-bought candy filled the holiday bowls. The hand mixer that Divinity required sat unused. The candy demanded dry weather and a steady hand, and the women who knew the trick of it were no longer teaching it. What most people miss is how much the weather mattered. A humid kitchen would ruin the batch. Before the rest of the house stirred, there was tomato gravy simmering on the back burner, and you could smell the bacon fat cutting through the sharpness of canned tomatoes from under your blanket. The dish needed nothing expensive, just drippings saved in the coffee can by the stove, a tablespoon of flour stirred until it browned, and a can of stewed tomatoes crushed by hand into the skillet. A pinch of sugar took the acid down. The gravy was poured thick over white rice and eaten with a spoon, sometimes alongside fried eggs or salt pork. It came from Depression-era black kitchens where 1 can of tomatoes fed a household of 8, and it traveled north to Detroit and Chicago inside the memories of women who never stopped cooking it. Through the 70s, it held on as a weekday standard, the kind nobody wrote down. You made it the way your mother showed you, and if you asked for measurements, she would shake her head and say, "Pour until it looks right." Hamburger steak with onion gravy hit the table more nights than most people want to admit, not because it was boring, but because it worked. You took a pound of ground beef, maybe 59 cents at the A&P in 1970, mixed it with salt, black pepper, a little garlic powder, and shaped thick oval patties with your hands. No egg, no breadcrumbs in the old school version. You seared those patties in a cast iron skillet until the crust turned almost black, then pulled them out and dropped sliced onions into that hot grease. The onions went soft and golden while you stirred in flour, scraping up every bit of foam stuck to the bottom. Water or broth went in next, whisked smooth, and the patties came back to simmer until the gravy thickened and the whole kitchen smelled like someone's mama was home. Served over white rice with canned green beans, it fed 5 people for under $2. Your grandmother never measured the flour. She just knew, and nobody who came after her has ever gotten that gravy quite right. Number 24, pig's feet salad with pickled onion. This was the cold dish that sat on the buffet between Thanksgiving and New Year in a heavy crockery bowl passed down from your grandmother. The feet were boiled until the meat slid off the bone, then chopped fine with celery, sweet pickle, and red onions soaked in vinegar. A spoon of mustard, a pinch of black pepper. You ate it on a saltine, and the cold gel of the broth held the whole thing together like memory. The flavor was the cold side of the holiday. By the early 1980s, pig's feet had been pulled from most northern grocery cases. Nobody under 30 knew how to clean them anymore. The salad disappeared 1 cousin at a time. The dish was quiet pride. Smothered chicken with onion gravy turned the cheapest parts of the bird into something that made grown men go quiet at the table. In the 1970s, whole chickens cost less than $1 a pound, and your mother stretched one across Sunday dinner and Monday lunch. She seasoned thighs and legs with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged them in flour, and browned them in cast iron until the crust went deep gold. The chicken came out. Thick sliced onions went in, sizzling in the drippings until they collapsed into something sweet. Flour went back into the fat, stirred fast, then broth hit the pan in a rush of steam that fogged the windows. The chicken returned, the lid came down, and the whole thing simmered an hour until the meat slid off the bone. Spooned over white rice, the gravy soaked through every grain. You knew it was done when the smell changed from sharp to deep and round. Only the person at the stove could read that moment. She kept them in a bag in the freezer, yellow and curled, and when you were young, they frightened you. But your grandmother saw something in chicken feet the grocery store did not: collagen, gelatin, a broth so rich it set like jelly when it cooled. The feet were scrubbed, outer skin peeled after a blanch, nails clipped with kitchen shears, into the pot with onion, celery, garlic, and bay leaves. Hours later, the liquor had turned golden and thick, the feet broken down until tiny bones pulled from tender meat. In the Caribbean and across West Africa, chicken foot soup was healing food, given to the sick and the newly delivered mother. Black families in the South carried that belief into the 1970s. When supermarkets replaced corner butcher shops, the stew disappeared from most kitchens. The women who made it swore the broth could fix anything. They're gone now. Nobody has found a replacement. The block party of the late 1970s was a kitchen turned inside out. Stoves upstairs, tables on the curb. Your grandmother sat in a folding chair in front of the building she had lived in for 30 years. By the 1990s, the permits were required, the buildings had been sold, the elders had moved to Yonkers or past, and the half-barrel grill was rusting behind a fence. The 25 dishes were not a menu. They were the proof that a neighborhood could feed itself without a caterer or a permit. Tell me in the comments which one your auntie carried down to the curb and which city she carried it in. Somebody is still pouring the tea.